Welcome to the State of Happiness. I'm your host, Leslie Juvin-Acker, Chief Happiness Officer at Leslie Inc., where we provide solutions for finding happiness for stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed senior-level managers, executives, and entrepreneurs. The State of Happiness podcast offers you conversation, inspiration, and ideas for helping you increase your happiness in the areas of your personal relationships, your career, your abundance, and your emotional well-being. So come along with us on this episode, and we'll help you get the tools, resources, and inspiration you need to help you find your own state of happiness. Today on the State of Happiness, we have the wonderful, the funny Will Sterling. He's an actor in Hollywood, as well as a producer on the Straight Talk with Ross Matthews podcast. Last time, told us about success in our careers, how to make ourselves memorable, how to determine your goal, and to prioritize so you can stay on a happy career track. But on this episode, we're going to talk about divorce, and Will opens up his heart with us and tells us how he found happiness through divorce and how you can too. Thanks for joining us at the State of Happiness podcast. Now, you can get happiness tips and news directly into your inbox each week with the State of Happiness newsletter. Receive special offers and invitations to exclusive online events. Go to leslieinc.org and sign up right now for the State of Happiness newsletter. For you is that, you're going through some personal changes yourself, and how do you navigate through your heart? How does that work for you? With the divorce, you were married for a good moment of time. Now, how do you navigate
We were married for 7 years, but I've known her since I was 10, and we were high school sweethearts and together for 12 years. And I struggled for sure. And we got married. She was 21 and I was 22. Mm-hmm. And now at 28, 29, we've just kind of grown into different people, but not in a way that we feel like we've grown apart entirely. We still want to be in each other's lives. We've been in each other's lives for too long that we can't just say like, oh, this is the end. We'll never see each other again.
Right.
But I got into therapy to kind of figure out what was going through my head and talk it out with an unbiased third party and sort of sort my feelings out and would come home and kind of prompt conversation. And anything that we had been going through that was like arguments and misunderstandings kind of just developed into these open, honest adult conversations about who we were and who we were becoming and what we wanted. And there was this feeling of, on both of our parts, to kind of get out of each other's way, because we've, and not in a negative way, like move, but like I'm in the way of you reaching something that could be greater for you and vice versa. So it's that cliche, but it is kind of true, I think, when you can come to understand what it means. Like if you love someone, you'll know when to set them free. And
right.
It doesn't mean that they're not in your life anymore. And it doesn't mean that you don't continue to love them or won't love them forever in a certain capacity.
Right.
It's just that you've grown and changed. And I think for me, especially, I never felt like it was a failed marriage because, like the divorce rate's so high and we tend to put that on people and make them feel bad about themselves. And I'm like, why shouldn't we be able to acknowledge the fact that we change and things can change and feelings can change? Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. Sometimes you can fix your relationship, sometimes you can't. And whatever happens, so long as you feel like you've pursued every avenue to try to understand what's going on and fix what can be fixed, if you both come to a conclusion, which my wife and I did, that like, oh, we're not broken. Like we're just not right for each other in this capacity anymore. So
right. Sounds like you made a choice for something else.
Yeah. And it was like, rather than try to force ourselves to stay together and end up hating each other, it'd be nice to be able to let each other go and find a way to love each other again in whatever friendship or way that is.
Right.
And even to this day, she and I still keep in contact and chats, and we, hung out a little bit, and it doesn't feel strange. And even in talking to my therapist, I'm like, there's no regrets. And she and I have had the same conversation where it's like, yeah, we miss one another. We miss the comfortability of it. And the, what's the word? The the schedule. It's like the same thing. You're used to seeing this person every day. The routine, there it is. But at the same time, we both know that we made the right decision. And so, yeah, I thought for so long that we had good communication because I had this whole thing about like never let the sun set on your anger. So even if we were having an argument, we would like talk until 4 a.m. until it was resolved. But only until recently did I realize that we never really had good communication until towards the end when we were able to communicate about where we were and what we wanted.
Right.
And now we can have effective communication going forward as friends. And it's certainly been a lesson. You know what I mean? Like every relationship is a lesson. And I've learned a great deal and she's learned a great deal. And now I can take that with me into the future and be happier and more successful because of it. And so I can never, it's so funny. Your friends want to jump at the chance that, you know, to be like, oh, you don't need her. Like she's bad, blah, blah, blah. Like that's what friends do because you want to take sides and make people feel good.
Right.
And I'll tell my friends, I'm like, I don't want you to have that perspective because I don't have that perspective.
Right.
And I was the one in the relationship, not you. So if you want to be mad at her, that's something that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
I'm not mad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
It sounds like you're having a conscious uncoupling.
Yeah. I think that's what it is in less words than I just said. Yeah.
No, but for real though, I mean, it's very powerful that you coming to all these realizations in this process, because so many people, and I coach couples as well, and that's one of the core tenets in my practice is coaching couples, because you know you can't do it alone. Like one person just can't fix themselves in a relationship and then be like, oh yeah, the other person's gonna change. Now they will change as a byproduct of your own individual changes, but if they can't see like their own and you know do their own mirror work, if you want to call it, no matter what somebody will do, it will not be able to preserve or sustain the relationship in a way that is intentional. And it's very interesting that you talked about, you know, getting out of each other's way, because one of the most common things I actually see in sessions is that people falsely and illogically believe that their own success is dependent upon the well-being and the happiness of their partner. And it's like, oh, if my partner is not happy and if they don't know where they're going in life and if they're lost or if they're stuck, then that surely means I can't move forward. And then what happens is that if our partner is going through a tough time, or if they're going through something that we don't understand or maybe don't even have the tools or feel equipped to deal with, we think, oh God, here we go. I'm going to have to be miserable along with them.
Right. Yeah.
So I look at this and I help these couples realize, like, hello, like you don't have to hold your happiness and well-being hostage just because your loved one is going through a tough time that you don't understand. Mm-hmm. Like provide the space for them to just work it out, and don't worry and feel threatened that if they're not happy 100% of the time, then you can't be either. You know, that's a prison that many couples build for themselves.
Oh, totally. And I fell into that a great deal because I've always kind of assumed the role of caretaker, and in my life, put myself second. I lost my mom at a fairly young age. I was 15. She passed away from breast cancer. And so I was in a position where I was physically taking care of her for the last year to 2 years of her life, where she couldn't drive, couldn't go to the bathroom on her own, like all these different things where you're put into this position of taking care of your parent as if they were your child. And at 15, I was like, oh, this is an interesting role reversal. And that, I think, really set like a lot my future, which is doing that for everybody and really bending over backward. And the relationship became not that I consciously made a decision to fix people. That's not where the relationship was, where, you know, sometimes people get involved because they're like, oh, he's not perfect now, but we'll get married and I'm sure I can fix him. It's like, no, don't ever, you know, like never.
He's not a dog. You can't train him.
Right. Exactly. So, but I think that was the decisions I was making unconsciously, because even with my friends, it took me a long time to learn how to say no. I always say yes and stretch myself too thin. Say yes to everybody and say yes to my ex's problems. And I became everybody's therapist. I was a best friend and a therapist. And so I got all the love, but I also got all the bad feelings and the anger and the, you know what I mean? Like I just got everything. And it got to a point where I was like, I'm not effectively taking care of myself. I'm not effectively loving myself. And if I can't effectively care for myself or effectively love myself, then how can I hope to do that for other people?
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of how therapy, I mean, I always had that notion. I always understood that as a concept, whereas like, you can't truly love others until you know how to love yourself.
Right.
And you can't really know how to love yourself until you've experienced love by someone else. So it's this kind of three-pointed triangle thing.
Right.
However, I could convince myself that I did know how to love myself. And the truth was that I didn't. And I was sort of equating my love for myself with my serving others.
Well,
And,
yeah, I
got,
mean, what happens is, and what you just said, all of these things that you just said is so common. And people don't realize that in dysfunctional relationships, whether you're married or not, is that losing yourself in a relationship. It's like it's weird, you know, if you think about it logically, like we believe we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves in a relationship. And then on top of that, you said, you know, there's this behavior that I've seen commonly. It's that, like you said, it's like, okay, if I take care of you, I put all my love in you, then I'll see it back through you. And then we're angry or resentful when we don't get it back in the ways that we want it. And it's like,
absolutely,
just do what you want for yourself. Like, don't give that responsibility. You know, I heard this the other day, is that many people, you know, we'll get, you know, this is a quote, don't get angry if you're opening the door and letting everybody walk through because nobody said thank you, but nobody even asked you to hold the door open.
I've found myself physically in that position so many times where I'm like, will somebody else take the door? I've been here holding somebody else.
Exactly. So in this context, it sounds like through this, you know, the marriage and the divorce process, you learned a lot of things, not just about your ex-wife, or, you know, I don't like to say ex-wife, but, you know, I can't say children's mother, but
term. Yeah, because we didn't have any kids, and I was thinking of that for myself, and I was like, I don't know, because we even talked about it. I was like, we don't really want to call each other like ex-wife, ex-husband. There's got to be a different term for it, and friends is what we settled on now, but that strikes people as strange. It's like sometimes if I refer to God, sometimes because it's so ingrained in me, I say he. So I've tried to make a conscious effort to say she, just to throw people off and see what they say. And it's fascinating to watch people's faces when you refer to God as she, and they're like, what? And it's the same with this as a relationship. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, my friend, I guess technically she's my former wife, you know, former maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my friends who's divorced in France, he would just call his ex-wife Madame. He would just say, Madame says that we have to do this. And I'm like, Madame is coming to pick up the kids. I'm like, okay. I never even knew her name until like 2 years later.
That's so cool. My therapist didn't even know my wife's name until just recently. And I've been working with him for 7 months throughout all this stuff. And because every time I'd come to help process my issues, I would just refer to her as my wife, not by her name. And so now I just started calling her by name, and he's like, oh, I think I'm just now realizing what her name is. And I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah. You know, it's very curious, because when I have clients come in, because obviously, you know, they're going through divorce, and I will say to them, please don't say ex-wife or ex-husband, because that just, because we say my ex, my. And it's like, you don't own this person, and you're not responsible for them anymore. So why are you calling them my, you know, and I'll ask them, what is their name? And I'll say, use their name. Or if I don't know the name, I'll say, most of the time they're with children, and I'll say your children's mother, or your children's father. And from that perspective, it really neutralizes it, because how can you hate somebody that gave you such an amazing gift and an opportunity to be a parent? So it's very interesting that you say that, because, you know, a lot of people get caught up in my ex-wife, and oh God, you know, it sounds like you learned so much, not just about her, not just about yourself, but also about your childhood and the patterns. It's a bummer, you know, that you got to get divorced, but also at the same time, this process of the marriage and the divorce has taught you so much about yourself, and has in a certain way helped you guys become better friends. Yeah,
I think so. And that's kind of what we realized, like I said earlier, is like, if we try to force ourselves to stay together, we'll probably end up hating each other and resenting each other. But if we let each other go, we can find a way to actually love each other in the healthiest way possible. And that concept of ownership is really interesting, because, you know, when we're going through problems, we always feel like our problems are the worst problems, or the other person doesn't understand us. And even tying back to what you said, when you're like, if I just invest enough time and energy into this person, eventually I'll get it back. And you can't do that to yourself, because then you're basically unconsciously admitting that the relationship is unbalanced and not effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. It's like I said, it's a bummer that people have to go through such painful things, because many people believe that we have to go through contrast in order to learn the difference between some things. Like, I have to go through hard times to know what the good times are like. And I always ask them. I ask them in session, like, why do you believe that? Why do you believe you have to struggle in order to experience and to appreciate good things in your life? It's like, can't you just appreciate everything and not label it as bad and not label it as awful? And we label things, and we're like, a divorce. Immediately when somebody thinks divorce, they think, oh my God, worst thing that ever happened to you, complete falling apart. And it's like, what if we said the divorce was is a path to awakening? What if divorce was a way to become a better friend? What if it's just a way to love yourself more? And then you start to see it in a different context. And then the meaning of it begins to have much more power in your life.
Totally. And what's funny is that I was talking to a friend about this, and much as the way that I do with my podcast sometimes, just in talking, I kind of stumbled upon the words of how I frame the ending of my marriage and yet the beginning of the rest of my life. Is that, a lot of people, when you refer to a divorce, they also refer to it as a failed marriage or a failed relationship. And I was like, first of all, it's society that sets the standard that marriage is success. You know what I mean? Like, just because you're married doesn't mean now you found relationship success.
Right.
But that being beside the point, I was like, I don't feel like my marriage failed. I feel like I had a successful marriage that found a conclusion.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
Even as an actor and as a filmmaker, and I love endings that warrant new beginnings. And this one was one where we sort of together found like, oh, we've successfully found the conclusion to this part of our life, and now we can move on together as friends into the new part of our life. Right.
Well, I mean, it is, they say, not that I ever said this vow in my marriage, but they say through death do us part. And it's like, well, maybe it's not, physical death. What if it's just the death of the relationship?
Totally. Yeah. That's huge. People force themselves to stay because they think that death is the end. And it's like, why be miserable your whole life?
Yeah, it's like, why do you have to do that? In so many past life readings and coaching sessions with couples, it's like, do you have to have unhappy times to appreciate each other? It's like, do you have to struggle? Do you have to yell at each other to get through to each other? Is that the only way? And when you get through this process, you begin to realize, oh my God, there are other ways of like being a human being. There's other ways of existing in reality besides just being married or just arguing or just being dramatic. There's many different ways to get to the next level and to be happy, which is really cool. I like that in your podcast where you talk about that, and you bring a mindfulness to Ross's podcast as well. I mean, very subtly, but you bring it in there. And then I'm very curious to see what other acting work that you do as well.
Me too. And it's interesting that it does definitely inform the work, and even my manager has said, like, if I've just recently kind of gone through a dry spell in terms of bookings, and he said, you've been going through a lot of personal stuff, and you're sort of like a guy who unconsciously, even if you know it or not, you're sort of going to the auditions, even though you just lost a hand, and you think that you can do this part, perform this thing, and if you do well enough, they won't notice that your hand is cut off, and yet all they can see and think about is the fact that you're suddenly missing a hand. And rather than try to fake like things are not happening or like nothing's going on, just incorporate that into the work that you're doing. So you learn that now you embrace the fact that you have no hand. I mean, it's kind of a rudimentary example, but it's kind of true in that we try to hide ourselves away from the pain and the difficult things that we're doing in an attempt to appear more well-balanced or organized or happy than we are. Right. But the longer we do that, the more pain we're going to cause ourselves in the future. If we just accept the circumstances and learn to process and deal with them, we're going to be happier faster. It's going to be harder in the present, but you're going to see rewards much faster and you're going to be happier faster.
Right, because you're not living in denial. A lot of people, they like you said before with motivational speakers, and kind of just to round this up here, it's for you said, people with motivational speakers, they go on, they pretend they don't have any life problems, pastors, and things like that, mega churches and stuff. And then they're hiding their own fallibility. And you look at this and you're going like, okay, this is a part of my story right now. I guess this is what I'm working on. I guess this is where the wisdom's coming from. I guess this is where the truth is, And a lot of times people go in, whether they go into an interview or they're going to an acting audition, and they think, okay, I got to be turned on and I got to take everything and throw it out the window, pretend like none of this is real that I'm going through. And it's like, even for me as a coach, I'm always like, go into that space, go into those feelings. Don't deny them. Don't write a story that they don't exist. Go into that space, because that's where the truth is. And of course, we all know the truth will set you free. Go there, because that's the door.
Right. Yeah, you have to. And it's up to you to step through that door. You know what I mean? All your life experiences and people and things. And I think I said that recently. One of my podcasts is like, when I jokingly say, don't buy this effing book. It's that, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm not you and I'm not on your path, but I can help open doors to you discovering your path, but it's up to you whether or not you want to walk through those doors.
Exactly.
And don't give credit to people who don't deserve the credit, because it's your life.
Right. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much, Will, for joining me today. You're such a thoughtful person, and I think a lot of people will benefit from this conversation today, because I know I have a lot of clients who have struggled through divorce and the unknown, and just dealing with how do you be yourself when you're going through all of these difficult things. How do you navigate your career when you are going through such major personal issues and loss? And your wisdom and your insight and just your realness, I think, is what is very inspiring. And I think that people should definitely tune into the Motivation Report. It's funny. You drink scotch through it sometimes.
Yeah, I had one episode I had a martini, and a couple episodes ago I did scotch. And that's another thing too. Like, if I was on stage and it wasn't a big deal, like, I'd have a beer while I gave them a, because that's something that I like to do. You know what I mean? And that's who I am authentically. And I'm not doing it to shock and awe people. I'm like, when you get together around a dinner table, usually there's good food, there's wine, and how can we recreate that experience? Now, if you're dealing with substance abuse problems, but in no means am I going to encourage that you crack open a bottle of wine. But it's just an element of my personality that, it's something that I do, and I don't overdo it. You don't progressively hear me get more drunk through the speech. It's just something that I like, and it kind of, to me, in a way, humanizes me to other people, because a lot of people do drink, and a lot of people. So yeah, it's just another facet of that, I suppose.
I love it. It's very funny, because in Europe, they do that too, with over wine and drinks in the evening. And in the daytime, if you want to have a serious conversation in France, which is where I'm also from, is that they'll say, okay, let's sit down, let's have a coffee right now. And then we're going to talk about something serious. So it's very, like, when I heard you, I was like, oh, that just reminds me of being in France. And I thought, oh, what a cute little thing to do. And you also bring people on. You bring people on from the show. You've brought Ross on. You brought CJ. You brought Nikki Claire. So you've brought other people, and intellectuals as well. You brought a former professor, right? So you have a variety of people who come in. It's not just you, but it's also people in your circle, experts, personalities. And you talk about a variety of things. You talk about, current pressing issues. You talk about philosophical conundrums. You talk about all sorts of stuff. And so just tell me and the audience, where can we find you? Where can we continue this conversation?
You can find the show, motivationreport.com is the website. You can subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. It's up on Stitcher as well. It's on Twitter at Motivate Report. And then I'm on social media at @WillSterling_. And sometimes I post the motivational things from my personal account. I try to keep it to the show's website, or there's a Facebook page too, like, facebook.com/The Motivation Report. It's all kind of tied there, but really all the stuff comes in the episode. So just subscribing on Apple Podcasts is probably the easiest way to continue the conversation, so to speak.
Perfect. So if you are listening and you've been through divorce, or you are on your path to expand yourself in your career and want to continue this conversation with Will Sterling, you can go ahead and find him there on Twitter and, subscribe, and let me know too if you like this episode and if this is something that, touches you, because I know it did for me. I really like to hear Will share his story today, because not only is it very important, all of us are going through some element. I'm a child of divorce. I think my dad's been divorced 3 times. So divorce touches everybody, and it's very important to tune into your own self and to know that you are the master and the commander of your own life. And like you said, take a grain of salt. I think it's really important. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time and for opening up your heart with us.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure.
A many thanks to you, happy campers, for joining us today on this episode of The State of Happiness. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can join me at Twitter at Leslie Juvin, as well as follow at Leslie Inc. on Instagram, and talk with us at Facebook at Official Leslie Inc. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to leave us a rating and subscribe and share with a friend. As always, thanks for joining us, and remember, a smile goes a long way. If you are ready to find your state of happiness, then a State of Happiness guide pack will get you there. 1 state, 4 destinations. These unique one-on-one coaching packages with me, Leslie Juvin-Acker, can help you reach your goals, dramatically improve your self-confidence, and create the life and career you want. Learn more about Leslie Inc. guide packs at leslieinc.org/gethappy. Watch the informational video, select a guide pack, and change your life in as little as 1 day. It's that easy. Leave the rest to me, because I'm your guide in the state of happiness.